My name is Eleanor Brooks. I was 65 years old when I sold the hotel chain I had built from scratch for $48 million. After decades of relentless work, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices, it felt like the closing of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. To celebrate, I invited my only daughter Rebecca and her husband Daniel to dinner at one of the finest restaurants in the city. The dining room was a world of quiet elegance. White linen tablecloths draped over every table, chandeliers cast a soft golden light, and the sound of silverware echoed gently against porcelain plates. I had chosen this place because it matched the occasion, a milestone of a lifetime's worth of labor. Rebecca raised her glass of champagne with a smile that glimmered under the light. "To your health, Mom," she said. "To all your achievements." Her husband Daniel joined the toast, his charm polished as always, though there was something about his tone that felt more relieved than joyful. They clinked glasses, and I raised my own drink of cranberry juice. My doctor had been clear: no alcohol for me, not with my heart condition. I had promised myself to listen. For a moment I allowed myself to feel proud. This fortune, this success, all of it had grown out of a tiny roadside motel that my late husband Richard and I once managed together. After his passing, when Rebecca was just 12, I took that seed and nurtured it until it became an empire. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of all that. Then my phone rang. It was my attorney and dear friend, Linda Carter, calling about the final details of the sale. I excused myself, stepped into the lobby for a better signal, and spoke briefly. Just business. When I returned to the table, Rebecca and Daniel looked perfectly at ease, their smiles polished, their voices casual. I reached for my glass of cranberry juice. The liquid shimmered under the chandelier's light, but something at the bottom made me pause. A faint residue, like powder that had not fully dissolved. My heart skipped a beat, though not from illness. I set the glass back down, steadying my breath. With a calm voice I said, "Who wants dessert?" But in that instant I knew the celebration was over before it even began. I didn't drink, and that decision saved my life. I left the restaurant that night shaken but silent, determined not to reveal my suspicion too soon. Outside, the cool evening air brushed against my face as I waited for the valet to bring my car. That was when I heard footsteps behind me, hesitant and quick. I turned and saw Joshua Miller, the waiter who had served us throughout the evening. His expression was grave, his eyes darting nervously toward the restaurant entrance. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, almost whispering, "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you need to know." I frowned, my pulse quickening. "What is it, Joshua?" He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he held something in a sealed plastic bag. Inside, I recognized it immediately: my glass of cranberry juice. "I thought it was strange," he continued, lowering his voice further. "When you stepped out to answer your phone, I was serving the next table. I saw your daughter take a small vial from her purse and pour something into your glass." Her husband kept glancing around to make sure no one noticed. I couldn't just ignore it. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Though I had already suspected foul play, hearing it confirmed sent a chill through me unlike anything I had ever experienced. My own daughter, my Rebecca. "You're certain of what you saw?" I asked, my voice unsteady. Joshua's gaze was steady, his tone firm. "I've worked in this restaurant for more than a decade. I've never interfered in a customer's private life, but this, I couldn't stay quiet. I already sealed the glass in case you want to have it tested. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in your drink." I reached out, taking the bag with trembling hands. "Thank you, Joshua. You may have just saved my life." He nodded, his eyes still full of concern. "Be careful, Mrs. Brooks. People who do things like this, they're dangerous." As he returned to the restaurant, I sat behind the wheel of my car, clutching the evidence. My mind raced with memories of Rebecca as a child, her laughter on the beach, the way she clung to me after her father died. How had we arrived here? How had love twisted into something so cold? I knew one thing for certain: silence was no longer an option. This was not just suspicion anymore. It was attempted murder. The following morning, I drove across town with the sealed glass tucked safely inside my purse. The streets felt different, harsher, as though the world itself had shifted overnight. I wasn't simply a mother anymore, I was a woman who had stared into the eyes of betrayal and lived to tell the tale. I arrived at a discreet laboratory, the kind of place where no questions were asked if the money was right. I placed the glass on the counter along with a thick envelope of $100 bills. The young technician behind the desk adjusted his glasses and looked at me curiously. What do you need, ma'am? I want a full toxicology report, I said firmly, and I need it today. No delays, no questions. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, sliding the bag toward himself. Understood. Leaving the lab, I sat in a small cafe down the street, nursing a cup of black coffee. My phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. Her voice was unusually sweet. Mom, are you feeling all right? You didn't look so good last night. I forced a light laugh, though my chest tightened at her tone. I'm fine, just tired. I'll rest today. Oh good, she replied quickly. I thought you might be sick or worse. The pause that followed chilled me. And Mom, about that foundation you mentioned, do you really think now is the right time? Maybe you should hold off for a while, focus on yourself. So that was it. The money. It was always about the money. Everything is already in motion, I said evenly. In fact, I'm finalizing documents with Linda this week. 30 million will go directly into the foundation. The silence on the other end was thick, followed by Rebecca's strained breathing. 30 million? Mom, that's almost everything. I need to go, I interrupted. We'll talk later. When I ended the call, my hands were trembling. In that moment, I understood exactly how much my life was worth to my daughter. $48 million. No more, no less. 3 hours later, the lab called. The results were ready. I drove back, collected the sealed envelope, and opened it in the privacy of my car. The report was brutally clear: propranolol, in a dose more than 10 times the therapeutic level. A dose capable of triggering fatal heart failure in someone with my condition. Rebecca hadn't made a careless mistake. She had crafted the perfect plan, and now I had proof. By the time I reached Linda Carter's office downtown, I felt as if I had aged 10 years in one day. She was waiting for me at her desk, sharp-eyed as always, her black-rimmed glasses perched firmly on her nose. Without a word, I handed her the toxicology report. She read it quickly, her face calm but her lips tightening ever so slightly. Propranolol, she said at last. Subtle, hard to detect in a routine autopsy. Whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing. Rebecca studied nursing for 2 semesters before dropping out, I explained bitterly. She must have learned just enough to be dangerous. Linda leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. We can take this to the police right now. Attempted murder isn't something to ignore. I shook my head and watched my daughter's name dragged through the courts. Watched the newspapers paint me as the mother whose only child tried to kill her for money. No, that isn't the legacy I want. Then what do you want, Eleanor? I drew in a long, steady breath. I want them to feel the weight of what they tried to do, not through prison bars but through something deeper, consequences they can't escape. Linda studied me for a moment, then opened a drawer and slid a thick folder across the desk. I anticipated this, she said. I asked for a full financial investigation. The report came in this morning. I flipped through the pages and the pieces fell into place. Rebecca and Daniel were drowning in debt, overdrawn credit cards, unpaid loans, luxury car payments months behind, a condo on the brink of foreclosure. Designer clothes, exotic trips, 5-star dinners, all bought on money they didn't have. It was a portrait of a life built on sand, collapsing under its own weight. They're bankrupt, I whispered, my throat tightening, desperate for cash. Exactly, Linda replied. And when you mentioned putting most of your fortune into a foundation, they must have realized their lifeline was slipping away. I closed the folder and pressed my hands together. What hurts the most isn't the poison. It's that they didn't need to do this. If Rebecca had come to me, told me they were in trouble, I would have helped. I always helped. Linda's expression softened, her voice gentle. Some people are blinded by greed, Eleanor. They can't see beyond their own desires. I sat in silence, staring at the report, the lines of debt and overdue balances blurring before my eyes. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had chosen murder over honesty. That was her solution. And that was the moment I knew the time for denial was over. It was time to act. The following morning, Linda and I set the trap. She called Rebecca and Daniel, inviting them to a discussion about adjustments to the foundation plans. They agreed without hesitation. Of course, money was the only language they truly understood. When I arrived at Linda's office, she met me in the lobby. They're already in the conference room, she said quietly. They look eager. They should be, I replied, adjusting the strap of my purse. Inside was the toxicology report, the damning evidence of their betrayal. Rebecca greeted me with open arms the moment I stepped inside. Mom? She exclaimed, trying to embrace me. I shifted slightly, letting her gesture fall short. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but she quickly disguised it, pulling out a chair for me instead. Daniel, in his tailored navy suit, flashed a smile so perfect it seemed rehearsed. "You look wonderful, Eleanor," he said smoothly. "We were worried about you." I sat down, keeping my expression calm. It's amazing what a good night's sleep can do. Linda opened a folder on the table, her tone professional. "As you know, Eleanor originally intended to allocate $30 million to the Richard Brooks Foundation. However, she's reconsidering. That's why I asked you both here." Rebecca's eyes lit up, her lips parting with hope. "Really? Mom, that's wonderful. I was worried you were rushing into something too big." I raised my hand to stop her. "Actually," I said softly, "I realized there are things more important than I imagined. Things that only become clear when you're standing at the edge of death." The room fell silent. Daniel shifted in his chair. Rebecca forced a nervous laugh. "Mom, you look fine. What do you mean?" Without answering, I reached into my purse and slid the toxicology report across the table. The folder landed with a soft thud. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Rebecca stared at it but didn't touch it. Daniel's face paled. "It's a lab analysis of my cranberry juice," I continued, my voice calm, almost clinical. "It shows a lethal dose of propranolol. Enough to stop the heart of someone with my condition. Enough to make my death look natural." The color drained from Rebecca's cheeks. Daniel's forehead began to glisten with sweat. "Mom, this isn't real," Rebecca stammered. "You can't believe." "The waiter saw you," I cut in. "Joshua Miller. He saw you take a vial from your purse and pour it into my glass while Daniel kept watch. He gave me the glass himself, sealed and preserved. He has nothing to gain from lying." Rebecca's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice shaking. "Even if that's true, do you really think anyone would believe a waiter? Or some lab report that could have been forged?" Linda's smile was cold. "That's why we had a private investigator dig deeper. We know Daniel searched online about propranolol overdoses. We know Rebecca purchased the drug at a pharmacy across town under a false name. And we know you owe over $2 million to creditors who are running out of patience." Rebecca's mask finally cracked. Her tears came suddenly, rolling down her face, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean it, Mom. I was desperate. We didn't know what else to do. You were giving it all away." "What about us? What about me?" I leaned forward, my voice heavy with the weight of years. "You had a choice. You could have asked me for help. But instead you tried to kill me, your mother." Rebecca sobbed harder, while Daniel looked like he was about to collapse. The silence in the room was suffocating. I let it stretch before I spoke again. "You have two options," I said firmly. "Option 1, Linda calls the police right now. With the evidence we have, a conviction is certain. You will spend years in prison. Option 2, you sign this." I nodded toward Linda, who slid another folder across the table. "A written confession. It will remain sealed in a safe. If anything happens to me, anything at all, it goes directly to the authorities. In exchange, you leave my life forever. No contact, no requests for money. You disappear." Rebecca stared at the papers through tear-blurred eyes. Daniel clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "And the debts," he whispered. "I'll pay them," I said coldly. "Not out of love, but to make sure your creditors never come looking for me. That is the only mercy I'll give." A long silence followed. Finally, Rebecca reached for the pen, her hand trembling. "We have no choice," she muttered. She signed her name. Daniel followed, his signature scrawled with defeat. As Linda collected the documents and sealed them away, I felt no triumph, only emptiness. The family I had devoted my life to was gone, not with a death, but with signatures on a page. When Rebecca and Daniel walked out of Linda's office that day, it was as though the air itself grew lighter. Yet inside me, the weight was unbearable. I had spent decades building a life for my daughter, and now that bond was severed beyond repair. The silence they left behind echoed louder than any courtroom sentence ever could. For days afterward, I moved through my house like a ghost. Every corner reminded me of Rebecca, her childhood photos, the seashells she collected on a beach trip when she was 10, the drawings she once taped to the refrigerator. I had believed that every sacrifice, every sleepless night spent working, every choice I made was for her. And still, she chose greed over love. But despair is a dangerous place to live. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at the toxicology report for the 100th time, I thought of my late husband, Richard. He had always believed that our success should serve a greater purpose. He used to say, "Eleanor, wealth means nothing if it doesn't change lives." The next morning, I called Linda. "I want to go forward with the foundation," I told her. "Not just as a name on paper, but as something real. A children's home, scholarships, a legacy Richard would have been proud of." She didn't hesitate. "I'll make it happen." And so I poured my energy into creating the Richard Brooks Foundation. I reviewed proposals for shelters, scholarship programs, and training centers. Instead of pouring myself into Rebecca's endless demands, I now poured myself into children who had no one, young people who needed a chance, families who had been overlooked. It didn't erase the pain, nothing could, but it gave my grief a place to go. The betrayal had left a wound, but the work of the foundation was the beginning of a scar, a sign of healing, proof that I could survive. For the first time in months, I felt something stirring inside me that wasn't anger or sadness. It was purpose, a quiet, steady purpose, and I promised myself I would protect it, no matter what shadows from the past tried to take it away. It was nearly 6 months later when the next twist in my story arrived. I was at the foundation's office, reviewing proposals for a scholarship program, when my assistant told me a young medical student was requesting a meeting. Her name was Emily Turner. She had applied for funding to support research on experimental treatments for heart disease. I agreed to see her, curious but expecting just another routine request. What I didn't expect was the young woman who walked through the door. Emily was 25, with dark hair tied neatly back, bright eyes full of determination, and a presence that radiated both confidence and kindness. She shook my hand firmly and spoke with a passion that reminded me of Richard when he used to talk about our very first model. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "thank you for meeting with me. I'm working on a project studying regenerative therapies for damaged heart tissue. It's early, but the potential is groundbreaking. With the right support, we could change how we treat heart disease forever." Her enthusiasm was infectious. For nearly an hour, she explained her project in terms I could understand, showing me diagrams and case studies. I listened intently, intrigued by both the work and by her composure. There was something familiar in the way she spoke, though I couldn't place it. Finally, she hesitated, her eyes lowering. "There's another reason I wanted to meet you, Mrs. Brooks. Something personal." My pulse quickened. "Go on." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She slid it across the table. I looked down and froze. It was a picture of a teenage Rebecca, younger than I had seen her in years. Beside her was a baby wrapped in a blanket. My heart pounded. "What is this?" Emily's voice was quiet, steady. "That baby is me. Rebecca is my mother. She had me when she was 17 and gave me up for adoption. I grew up with a wonderful family in Ohio, and I never knew the truth until I turned 25 and received my adoption records." I sat there stunned, staring at the photograph. My hands trembled. "Rebecca never told me," I whispered. "She never said a word." Emily's eyes softened with compassion. "I didn't come here to reopen old wounds. I came because I thought you should know. You have a granddaughter, and I wanted to meet you, not just as a donor to my research, but as family if you're willing." For the first time in a long while, my eyes filled with tears that weren't born of betrayal. I had lost a daughter to greed and deceit, but before me stood something I never imagined I would find again: hope, in the form of a granddaughter I never knew existed. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I began to see each other often. At first, our conversations were careful, both of us uncertain about how to step into this unexpected bond. But slowly the walls came down. She visited my home one evening, and together we cooked dinner in my kitchen. She chopped vegetables while I stirred the sauce, and for the first time in months, laughter filled the room again. She asked questions about Richard, the grandfather she never had the chance to meet. I showed her old photographs, Richard standing proudly in front of our first motel, Rebecca as a little girl holding seashells from the beach. Emily listened with shining eyes, as though she were gathering pieces of a puzzle she had longed to solve. When she finally called me Grandma for the first time, it slipped out so naturally that I almost didn't notice. But when I did, I felt my chest tighten, not with pain, but with something like healing. Meanwhile, the Richard Brooks Foundation grew stronger. The children's home was under construction, scholarships were being awarded, and Emily's research project had officially received funding. I sat in on one of her lab presentations and was struck by her brilliance. She was driven like Richard, determined like me, but carried a compassion that seemed entirely her own. I thought of the irony. Rebecca, who had grown up with every advantage, had chosen greed and destruction. Emily, raised by a modest family, had chosen service and hope. One evening, as we looked through the family album together, Emily paused at a photo of Rebecca in her teenage years. She studied it for a long time before speaking. "She looked so full of life," she said softly. "I wonder what changed." I sighed, closing the album gently. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. Sometimes, no matter how much love we give, people choose their own path. And sometimes that path breaks our hearts. Emily placed her hand over mine. "Maybe this is why we found each other. Maybe we're the path that was meant to be." In that moment, I realized something I had thought was lost forever. I still had a family. Not the one I had expected, not the one I had poured my entire soul into, but a family nonetheless. And that, I decided, was enough. 1 year later, I stood in the bright courtyard of the Richard Brooks Children's Home. The building was finished, its walls painted with cheerful colors, its rooms filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. On that morning, balloons hung in the air, and the ribbon-cutting ceremony marked not just the beginning of a shelter, but the beginning of something far greater, a legacy born out of heartbreak. As the mayor gave his speech and the crowd applauded, my eyes wandered to Emily. She was speaking to a group of volunteers, her white lab coat still draped over her shoulders from the research lab. She caught my gaze and smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt whole. My life had been scarred by betrayal, but those scars had also guided me to unexpected love. I thought of Rebecca then. She had chosen greed over compassion, illusion over honesty. The daughter I once knew no longer existed, and I had accepted that truth. But through Emily, through the children now running freely in the garden, I had gained something even more powerful, the chance to build a future out of ashes. Standing beneath the shade of an old oak tree on the property, I whispered to myself, "Sometimes the poison meant to kill us becomes the seed of a new beginning." And as I watched the children laugh, I realized the greatest revenge was not anger or punishment. It was creating something beautiful, something lasting, in the place where pain had once lived. So here is my story. If you believe love and compassion can transform even the deepest betrayal into hope, I ask you to share it. Like this video, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and help these lessons travel farther than I ever could alone.